The whistle of the evening train echoed through the dusty town as a young woman stepped down onto the wooden platform. Her shoes were worn, her dress plain, and in her trembling hands she carried a small brown suitcase. Everything she owned in the world. She looked around nervously, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the man who had promised to marry her. But no one stood with flowers, no one called her name, no hand reached out to greet her. Only the busy townsfolk passed her by, not even noticing the mail-order bride who had travelled hundreds of miles with nothing but hope in her heart. Her name was Clara. She had grown up an orphan, never knowing the warmth of family, never hearing anyone call her daughter. For months she had written letters to a man she had never met, believing perhaps this was God's way of giving her a home, a place, and someone who might finally want her. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, her heart sank deeper and deeper. Perhaps the man had changed his mind. Perhaps no one truly wanted her after all. Clara lowered her head, gripping the handle of her suitcase tighter. The platform began to clear. One by one, families reunited. Friends laughed and hugged. Men in dusty hats welcomed their wives. And she remained, alone. The chill of rejection stung more than the evening wind. Just as Clara turned to walk away, the sound of boots striking the wooden planks made her pause. A tall man approached, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of hard years and endless work. His face was rugged, weathered by the sun, and his eyes carried sorrow too heavy for words. This was Ethan, a rancher who had buried his wife years ago and had since lived in silence with only his little daughter for company. He had never written Clara, never expected a bride to arrive. His sister, worried about his loneliness and his daughter's upbringing, had secretly arranged the correspondence. And so Ethan arrived late, unsure of what he would even say to the stranger standing before him. Clara raised her eyes timidly, hope flickering for just a moment before fading into uncertainty. Ethan tipped his hat awkwardly. "Miss Clara?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. She nodded, her throat too tight to answer. "I'm sorry I'm late," he muttered. "The ranch keeps me longer than I plan." He offered to carry her suitcase, but the silence between them was heavier than words. They walked side by side toward his wagon, neither knowing what to expect, neither daring to believe in the possibility of belonging. As the wagon wheels creaked along the dirt road, Clara stared at the horizon, whispering silently to herself, "Maybe no one truly wants me." What she didn't know was that at the ranch a pair of small eyes watched from the window of a lonely house. A little girl clutching her doll tightly, waiting for the stranger who might change everything. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail, its wooden wheels groaning with every stone they rolled over. Clara sat stiffly on the seat, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside her, Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if even a single glance at her might betray the battle he was fighting inside. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the distant call of a crow. Clara wanted to speak, to thank him for coming, to ask about his life, but her lips refused to move. She could still feel the sting of loneliness from standing abandoned at the station. Ethan cleared his throat once, then again, but no words came. He wasn't a man of conversation. For years, the cattle, the land, and the wide, empty sky had been his only companions. And though his heart wasn't unkind, it had grown guarded, locked tight since the day he laid his wife into the ground. Betty. Last, the ranch came into view. The house stood tall but tired, its paint peeling, shutters hanging loose, and the front porch sagging under years of neglect. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and broken fence posts lined the yard like wounded soldiers. Clara's heart trembled. This wasn't the home she had imagined when she agreed to be a mail-order bride. She had pictured warmth, safety, laughter around a table. Instead, it felt as though sorrow itself had taken root in the soil. As Ethan guided the horses to a halt, Clara stepped down carefully. Before she could even catch her breath, she felt a pair of eyes watching her. She turned and saw a little girl standing at the doorway. The child couldn't have been more than 6. Her hair was messy, her dress a little too small, and in her arms she clutched a worn rag doll as if it were her only friend. Her wide eyes, full of both fear and longing, fixed on Clara with a silence that pierced deeper than any words. "This is my daughter, Anna," Ethan said quietly, his tone carrying both pride and sadness. Clara managed a soft smile, her voice gentle. "Hello, Anna." But the little girl didn't answer. She only hugged the doll tighter and slipped back behind the doorway, vanishing into the shadows of the house. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the faint scent of dust and wood smoke. The home was neat, but cold, everything in order, yet nothing alive. No flowers on the table, no laughter in the halls, only silence. Ethan showed Clara to a small room at the back of the house. The bed was plain, the dresser old, and the single window looked out over a barren field. "You can rest here," he muttered. She placed her suitcase on the floor and nodded politely, but as he turned to leave, she found her courage at last. "Mr. Ethan," she said softly, "if you don't mind me asking, why did you send for—" "Me?" He froze for a moment, his shoulders tense. Slowly he turned his face halfway toward her. "I didn't," he admitted. "My sister. She thought my daughter needed a woman's care. I didn't expect—" His words trailed off, heavy and unfinished. Clara's heart sank. So it was true. She wasn't wanted, not even here. She forced a small smile to hide her pain. "I see," she whispered. That night, as the house settled into silence, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. The walls felt foreign, the bed too large, the air too empty. She wondered if she had made the worst mistake of her life, coming all this way for a man who hadn't even asked for her, and yet, as she closed her eyes, she remembered Anna's eyes at the door. There had been fear there, yes, but also a question, an unspoken longing. Perhaps the father did not want her. But the child. The child's heart told another story. What Clara could not know was that little Anna, curled up in her small bed clutching her doll, whispered into the darkness, "Please, God, don't let her leave us too." The morning sun crept through the cracks in the shutters, but the house remained quiet, too quiet for a home with a child. Clara woke early, washed her face with the cold water from a tin basin, and adjusted her plain dress before stepping into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of ashes from last night's fire. A pot sat on the stove, untouched. Clara looked around. No. Breakfast laid out. No warmth in the room. It felt more like a place of survival than of living. Ethan was already outside, his heavy boots crunching against the dirt as he worked at repairing a broken fence post. Clara could see him through the window, his strong frame bent in silence, every movement precise but joyless. Left alone, she noticed the small table in the corner. On it sat a single plate, a half-eaten piece of bread and a small cup. That must have been Anna's. Clara hesitated, then moved toward the child's room. The door was slightly ajar, and inside she saw Anna sitting cross-legged on her bed, clutching her rag doll as if the fabric thing could shield her from the world. "Good morning, Anna," Clara said softly, careful not to frighten her. The girl looked up, her big eyes wary. She didn't reply. Instead, she pulled the doll closer and pressed her cheek against its fraying head. Clara sat gently on the edge of the doorway, not daring to intrude further. "That's a very pretty doll you have," she continued, her voice warm. "Does she have a name?" Anna's lips parted, as if she wanted to answer, but no sound came. She only shook her head slightly. Clara smiled, her heart aching at the child's silence. "I had a doll once," she whispered, though it was only half true. In truth, she had longed for one as a girl, but had never been given such a gift. "I used to pretend she was my best friend, and I would tell her all my secrets. Sometimes that made me feel less alone." Anna's eyes flickered with recognition, as though she understood the word alone better than most children her age. For a long moment, silence filled the room again. Then, in the faintest voice, Anna asked, "Did she ever talk back?" Clara's breath caught at the sound of her voice. It was the first words the child had spoken to her. Smiling gently, she answered, "Not with words, but sometimes when I held her tight enough, it felt like she was listening." Anna lowered her gaze to her own doll, stroking its worn dress with small, tender fingers. Clara's heart swelled. She wanted desperately to reach out, to embrace this fragile soul who carried loneliness so similar to her own. But she held back, afraid of scaring her away. "I could sew her a new dress for you," Clara offered softly, "if you'd like." For the first time, Anna's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. She nodded once, quick and shy. That tiny gesture lit something inside Clara. A spark of belonging, the first warmth in a house that had felt like stone walls and silence. Later that evening, as Clara prepared a simple meal of bread, beans, and stew, she noticed Anna sneaking into the kitchen, watching from behind the doorframe. Clara pretended not to see her at first, then casually set an extra spoon on the table. "I hope you're hungry," she said gently. Anna hesitated, then padded over, climbing onto the chair. She didn't speak, but the way she sat, close enough to Clara, yet clutching her doll, spoke volumes. Ethan entered moments later, his boots heavy against the floorboards. He looked at the table, surprised to see both Clara and Anna sitting there. For months, meals had been quick, silent, each person eating alone. Now, for the first time, they looked almost like a family. Ethan didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered on the scene. Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. That night, when Clara tucked Anna into bed, the little girl whispered so softly she almost missed it. "Thank you." Clara brushed a stray curl from her forehead, her heart aching, in the sweetest way. "You're welcome, sweetheart." And as she walked back to her small room, she realized this house might not have been warm when she arrived. But with every small smile, every shy word, it was slowly beginning to change. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Clara rose early, helped prepare meals, and quietly kept the household in order. Ethan rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, his voice always low, almost guarded. He treated her with politeness but never warmth. Yet amidst the cold silence of the ranch, Clara found a flicker of light in Anna. The little girl, though shy and cautious, had begun inching closer to her. Some days she would leave her doll on the kitchen table for Clara to notice. Other times she would follow her out to the garden, watching silently as Clara pulled weeds or gathered herbs. Still, Anna rarely spoke. She moved like a child afraid to make noise, as if laughter or chatter didn't belong in the house anymore. Clara's heart ached for her. She knew too well what it felt like to live unseen, to feel unwanted. One evening, as the sun dipped behind, the hills and the shadows of the barn stretched long across the yard, Clara found Anna sitting alone on the porch steps. The child's doll lay in her lap, its faded dress fluttering in the evening breeze. Clara approached slowly, careful not to frighten her. "It's a pretty sunset, isn't it?" she said softly. Anna nodded, her little shoulders hunched. Clara sat beside her, folding her hands in her lap. They sat together in silence until Anna whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes I think Mama is up there, in the sky." Clara's breath caught. She turned gently toward the child, her heart heavy with compassion. "I think you might be right," she answered. "Mamas never really leave their little ones. They just watch from a place we can't see." Anna pressed her lips together, clutching her doll tighter. A single tear slid down her cheek. Clara's hand itched to reach out to wipe it away, but she held back, not wanting to push too far. That night after supper, the house settled into its usual hush. Ethan disappeared into his room, weary from the day's work. Clara tidied the kitchen and then went to check on Anna. She found the child curled under a thin blanket, her doll tucked beneath her chin. Clara knelt by the bedside, brushing a strand of hair from Anna's forehead. "Sleep well, little one," she whispered. Anna's eyes fluttered open, wide and glistening in the dim candlelight. For a long moment, she just looked at Clara, as if weighing a question too heavy for her small heart. Then, in the softest voice, trembling and unsure, she whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" The words pierced Clara's soul. Her breath caught, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't expected them, hadn't dared dream of hearing such a plea. Her whole life she had longed to be wanted, to belong. And here, in the quiet of a child's bedroom, those words gave her more than she had ever believed possible. Clara swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, leaning closer. "I would be honored to be your mommy." Anna's small hand reached out from beneath the blanket, clutching Clara's fingers. For the first time, the child smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her little face. Clara stayed by her side until sleep finally claimed her. She whispered a prayer into the stillness of the room, thanking God for a moment she never thought she would have. From the doorway, unseen, Ethan stood in silence. He'd come to check on his daughter, but what he witnessed stopped him cold. His little girl, who had been so silent, so withdrawn since her mother's death, had spoken words he hadn't expected. Words that pierced through the armor around his own heart. Ethan turned away, retreating into the shadows, torn between guilt and something else, a flicker of hope he wasn't ready to face. But for Clara, everything had changed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a mail-order bride waiting to be chosen. She was wanted, needed, loved. And it had all begun with a whisper from a child who longed for a mother's embrace. The days after Anna's whispered plea carried a fragile warmth. Clara found herself humming softly as she cooked, and Anna followed her more openly now, bringing small flowers from the yard, tugging at her skirt when she wanted company, even letting out a quiet giggle when Clara stitched a new dress for her doll. But if Clara's heart was slowly blooming, Ethan's was caught in a storm. He noticed the change in his daughter, the spark in her eyes, the little laugh that had been missing for so long. Yet each time he saw Clara tucking Anna's hair behind her ear or holding her small hand as they walked across the yard, his chest tightened. Memories of his late wife returned like ghosts he couldn't silence. Her smile, her gentle hands, the way she used to sing Anna to sleep. Ethan carried the weight of her absence like a stone in his chest, and watching another woman, this stranger, step into that space felt like betrayal. One evening, as they sat at supper, Ethan spoke at last. His voice was steady, but his eyes remained fixed on his plate. "Clara," he said, "you've been kind to Anna. She's taken to you more than I expected." Clara's heart quickened, uncertain of where his words might lead. "She's a precious child," she said softly. "Any woman would be blessed to call her daughter." Ethan's jaw tightened. He set down his fork. "But I need to be clear. I didn't send for a bride. I never meant to bring another woman into this house. My sister, she took it upon herself." The words stung like a blade. Clara lowered her eyes, blinking away the tears that threatened to fall. She had known, of course. He had told her before. But hearing it again, spoken so firmly, reminded her that in his eyes she was still unwanted. "I understand," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Outside the ranch, the whispers had already begun. In town, women clucked their tongues and men shook their heads. "They say Ethan's got himself a mail-order bride now. Poor woman, he doesn't even talk to her. I give it a month before she leaves." The gossip slithered through the streets like wildfire, and though Clara rarely left the ranch, she felt the sting of those unseen eyes. Ethan, too, heard the words when he went to buy supplies. They made him bristle with shame, not for himself, but for the woman who now shared his name only by arrangement, not by affection. One night, unable to sleep, Clara sat by the small window in her room. She looked out at the moonlit fields and pressed her hands together tightly. Her heart longed for belonging, but every sign told her she was still a guest in a house that wasn't hers. The thought of leaving crept into her mind. She could pack her small suitcase, walk away quietly, and spare Ethan the burden of her presence. After all, he had not asked for her. And perhaps it was selfish to stay when his heart clearly belonged to another, the memory of the wife he still mourned. Yet as her tears fell softly onto her folded hands, a small knock came at her door. The creak of the hinge revealed Anna, her eyes wide with fear that she might be sent away. "Clara," the child whispered, clutching her doll. "You're not going to leave, are you?" Clara's heart broke. She gathered the child into her arms, holding her close. "Oh, Anna," she murmured, "I don't want to leave. But sometimes people don't want me to stay." Anna's little arms wrapped tightly around her neck. "I want you to stay, please. Don't leave me too." Clara closed her eyes, her heart trembling. For the first time since stepping off that train, she realized she wasn't entirely unwanted. To one small soul in this lonely house, she was already something more than a stranger. And though Ethan's silence still loomed, though the town's gossip still burned, Clara knew one thing for certain. She couldn't abandon the child who had whispered for her to be Mommy. What she didn't know was that Ethan, from the shadows of the hallway, had heard Anna's desperate plea, and in that moment, guilt weighed heavier than ever on his heart. The early days of autumn swept across the land, carrying a chill that crept into the ranch house each evening. Clara kept Anna bundled in a shawl, watching closely when the little girl's cheeks turned too pale, or her small cough lingered longer than it should. At first it seemed like nothing more than a passing cold. But one night, as the winds howled outside and the fire crackled low, Clara heard it, the ragged, shallow breathing of the child she had come to love. She rushed to Anna's bedside. The little girl's face burned with fever, her skin hot beneath. Clara's trembling hand, her tiny chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a struggle. "Ethan!" Clara cried, her voice sharp with panic. Within seconds, Ethan was at the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the sight. His strong hands, usually so steady, now trembled as he touched his daughter's brow. "She's burning up," Clara said urgently. "We need help, medicine, something." But Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. "The doctor's in town, 20 miles away. In this storm." His voice cracked with helplessness. "We may not make it." Clara refused to accept that. She sat on the edge of the bed, lifting Anna into her arms. The child stirred weakly, whispering, "Mommy," through cracked lips. Clara's heart shattered. She kissed her forehead. "I'm here. Sweetheart, I won't leave you." For hours Clara worked tirelessly, soaking cloths in cool water, pressing them against Anna's skin, coaxing her to sip broth, whispering prayers into the night. Ethan paced the floor, fists clenched, every fiber of him torn between fear and guilt. Finally, when Anna's breathing grew shallow again, Ethan slammed his hand against the wall. "I should have sent for the doctor earlier. I should have—" "Stop!" Clara cut in firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "This isn't about what you should have done. It's about what we're going to do now." Ethan froze, staring at her. For the first time he saw not a fragile mail-order bride, but a woman of strength, fierce, steady, unafraid to stand in the face of despair. "I'll ride," Ethan said at last, his voice low but resolved. "I'll bring the doctor here no matter the storm." Clara's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Then go, and know that she'll be safe with me until you return." Their eyes met in that charged moment, his full of torment, hers burning with a quiet fire. Something unspoken passed between them. Trust, and perhaps even the seed of love. Ethan pulled on his coat, saddled his horse, and vanished into the storm. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Clara's life. The wind rattled the windows, the fire nearly died, and Anna drifted in and out of feverish dreams. Each time the child stirred, she clung to Clara's hand, whispering softly, "Don't leave, Mommy." Clara's tears soaked the little girl's hair as she whispered back, "Never, I'll never leave you." When exhaustion threatened to overtake her, Clara forced herself awake by praying aloud. "Lord, don't take her. Not her. She's too little. She needs love, she needs her father's, and she needs me. Please, don't let me fail her." Finally, as dawn broke gray and cold over the prairie, the sound of hooves pounded against the frozen earth. Ethan burst through the door, snow clinging to his coat, the town doctor close behind. Clara stepped aside only long enough for the doctor to examine Anna. The verdict was grim but hopeful. Pneumonia, caught in time. With care and medicine, she could recover. Relief crashed over Clara like a wave. She fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching Anna's hand and thanking God through sobs. Ethan, too, sank into the chair, his broad shoulders shaking as he covered his face with his hands. When at last he looked up, his eyes met Clara's, and this time there was no coldness, only raw gratitude. "You saved her," he whispered hoarsely. "If it weren't for you, I might have lost her." Clara shook, her head, her tears shining. "No, Ethan, we saved her together." And in that moment, something in Ethan's heart shifted. For the first time since his wife's death, he realized he was no longer carrying his burden alone. Clara wasn't just a stranger brought to the ranch. She was the woman who had fought for his daughter's life as fiercely as any mother, and perhaps she was meant to be more than that. The days that followed the storm were slow, fragile, and filled with quiet prayers. Anna remained weak, but each morning brought a little more color to her cheeks. Clara rarely left her side, spooning broth to her lips, smoothing her hair and humming soft lullabies. Ethan kept watch too, though often from the doorway. His broad figure loomed in the shadows, his eyes filled with worry, and something else, something he struggled to name. At first he spoke little, but as the days turned into weeks, his silence began to break. One evening Clara sat by Anna's bed, gently braiding her hair. The child had finally begun to smile again, her small hands playing with the doll Clara had mended. Ethan lingered nearby, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "She's stronger," he said quietly. Clara looked up, surprised to hear warmth in his voice. "Yes, she's going to be just fine." Ethan's eyes softened as they rested on his daughter. "I thought I'd lost her." His voice cracked and he quickly looked away. "And I don't know if I could have survived it." Clara's heart ached at the sight of his pain. She wanted to reach out to reassure him, but she stayed still, letting the silence speak for her. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Clara, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You stepped in when I couldn't. You gave Anna back her smile." Clara lowered her gaze, her hands stilling in Anna's hair. "I didn't do it for repayment. I did it because she needed me. Because—" She hesitated, then whispered, "Because I love her." Ethan's breath caught. He stared at her, words tangled in his throat. He saw now what he had refused to see before, the strength in her eyes, the tenderness in her hands, the quiet courage. That had saved them both. That night, as Anna slept peacefully, Ethan stepped outside. The sky stretched wide and endless above him, the stars sharp and cold. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his grief loosening. His late wife's memory still lived in his heart, but it no longer chained him. He realized then that his sister's letter, though unwanted at the time, had not been a mistake. Perhaps it had been providence. A few days later, Clara stood by the corral, feeding the horses as the morning sun rose golden across the fields. She wore a plain blue dress, her hair pinned simply, yet Ethan thought she looked like the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. He walked toward her, his boots crunching against the frost-tipped grass. She turned, startled, then offered a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. He hesitated, then added, "Clara, I've been meaning to talk to you." Her hands stilled on the sack of grain. "About what?" He took a breath, his voice rough with honesty. "When you first came here, I told you I didn't want a bride, that I couldn't give my heart again, and I meant it, or at least I thought I did. But after all you've done, after seeing the way Anna looks at you, the way I look at you, I can't keep pretending." Clara's heart raced. She bit her lip, afraid to hope. "Ethan." He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Clara, you've already become the mother Anna prayed for. And whether you realize it or not, you've become the woman I didn't know I needed. I don't want you to feel like a guest in this house any longer. I want you to feel like what you are, a part of this family, my wife, my partner, my home." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Are you sure? I don't want to take her place in your heart. You're not taking her place," Ethan said firmly, gently lifting her chin so she met his eyes. "You're building a new place beside it. Love doesn't run out, Clara, it grows." In that moment, the walls around her heart crumbled. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then yes. Yes, Ethan." That evening, as the sun dipped low and the prairie turned gold, Anna ran across the yard, her laughter ringing out like music. She held both Clara's and Ethan's hands, swinging between them, her little voice shouting, "Mommy! Daddy!" Ethan's eyes met Clara's over the child's head. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time Clara felt the truth deep in her soul. She wasn't unwanted. She wasn't alone. She had found her home, here, with Ethan and Anna, in the heart of the ranch, and as the horizon blazed with light, Clara knew this was only the beginning of the family she had always longed for.